The water is black. Mahidevran is 24 years old, and she is standing at the edge of the Bosphorus in the hour before dawn, watching the surface of the strait ripple with currents that have carried bodies to the sea for 300 years. Her wrists are bound behind her back with silk cord, the same silk that adorned her chambers when she was still a favorite of the Sultan, when she slept on cushions embroidered with thread of gold and woke to servants who called her Light of the Harem. Now she stands in a cotton shift, barefoot on stones still wet from the night's tide, her hair unbound and tangled by the wind that sweeps down from the Black Sea. The shift is thin enough that she can feel the cold penetrating to her bones, thin enough that the men who surround her can see the outline of her body beneath it. But modesty no longer matters. Nothing that happened to her body from this moment forward would be witnessed by anyone who would survive to speak of it. She can smell the water, salt and rot, and something darker underneath, the accumulated residue of centuries of disposal. She can smell the sweat of the men beside her, the mutes who serve the bostanchi, bashi, the chief gardener, whose actual duties have nothing to do with gardens. She can smell her own fear, sharp and animal, cutting through the perfumes that still cling to her skin from the hammam where she was washed and prepared for this moment. They washed her carefully, almost tenderly. They oiled her hair and scented her skin and dressed her in white, as if preparing her for a wedding rather than an execution. The rituals of the harem extended even to death. A woman who had shared the Sultan's bed, who had borne the possibility of royal children, could not be disposed of carelessly. Her destruction required ceremony. Beside her on the stones rests a sack, canvas, reinforced with leather at the seams, large enough to contain a human body. She has heard of these sacks since her first days in the harem, whispered about by older women who used them as warnings, as cautionary tales, as reminders of what happened to those who forgot their place. She never imagined she would see one prepared for her. The sack is not empty. She can hear sounds from within it, scratching, hissing, the rustle of scaled bodies moving against canvas, the high, desperate mewling of cats that have been starved for 3 days in preparation for this moment. She knows what will happen. She has known since the moment the Kuzlar Asa, the chief black eunuch, appeared at the door of her chamber with guards who did not speak. She knew when she was brought before the Valide Sultan, the Sultan's mother, who pronounced judgment without allowing defense. She knew when the silk cord was wrapped around her wrists, and she was led through passages she had never seen before, downstairs that descended into the foundations of the palace, through gates that opened onto the waterfront, where the boats of the condemned were moored. She will be sewn into the sack with the animals. The sack will be weighted with stones and thrown into the Bosphorus. She will sink into the black water while the starving cats claw at her flesh, while the snakes strike at whatever warmth they can find, while the weight drags her down into depths where no light penetrates. She will drown, but drowning will not be the worst of it. The worst will be the minutes before drowning, the chaos of animal terror combined with her own, the darkness and the cold and the creatures that share her final moments. This is the punishment for what she has been accused of doing. Not convicted, accused. In the Ottoman harem, the accusation was the conviction. The Sultan's word was law, and the Sultan's mother spoke with the Sultan's voice in matters concerning the women of the palace. Mahidevran was accused of betraying the Sultan with a palace guard. She was accused of violating the most fundamental rule of the harem, the rule that made the entire system possible, the certainty that every child born to a Sultan's woman was the Sultan's child. She was accused of contaminating the bloodline that had ruled the Ottoman Empire for 200 years. She was innocent. She had never touched the guard she was accused of taking as a lover. She had never touched any man except the Sultan himself, who had called her to his bed perhaps 24 times over the 3 years she had been a concubine of the imperial household. but her innocence was irrelevant. What mattered was that another woman, a rival who wanted her gone, had whispered the right words to the right ears. What mattered was that the Valide Sultan believed, or chose to believe, or found it convenient to believe. What mattered was that Mahidevran had failed to produce a son in 3 years, making her expendable, making her removal a matter of housekeeping rather than tragedy. She thinks of her mother, who sold her to the slave traders when she was 12 years old because the family needed money for her brother's apprenticeship. She thinks of the years in the training house, learning the arts that would make her valuable: music, poetry, dance, conversation, the 1,000 skills required of women who would serve in the houses of the powerful. She thinks of the day she was purchased for the imperial harem, the day she thought her fortune had been made, the day she entered the Topkapi Palace believing she was ascending to a life of unimaginable luxury. She had not understood then what the luxury cost. She had not understood that the golden cage was still a cage, that the silk-lined walls could become a prison, that the same system that elevated her could destroy her on the word of a jealous competitor. She understands now. The Bostanchi, Bashi, approaches. He is a large man, his authority visible in his bearing, his face expressionless in the way that men who conduct state murders learn to keep their faces. He nods to the mutes who stand beside Mahidevran, and they grip her arms, lifting her slightly off the stones. "You may speak," the Bostancha, Basha says. "If you have final words, you may speak them now." Mahidevran considers. She could protest her innocence again. She could curse the rival who betrayed her. She could beg for mercy that will not be granted. She could pray to Allah for forgiveness of sins she did not commit. Instead, she speaks the truth that will be buried with her in the black water of the Bosphorus. "I was never unfaithful," she says. "I loved the Sultan. I would have given him sons if he had given me the chance. What is done to me tonight is murder, not justice." The Bostanchi, Bashi's expression, does not change. He has heard such words before. Every woman who faces this death proclaims her innocence. Some of them are lying. Some of them are telling the truth. It makes no difference to him. His job is not to judge. His job is to carry out the judgment of others. "It is time," he says. The mutes move forward with the sack. What you are about to learn has been systematically suppressed by Ottoman historians who preferred to celebrate imperial glory rather than document imperial horror. The archives of the Topkapi Palace contain records of thousands of women who entered the harem and simply disappeared from documentation, their fates indicated only by euphemisms that scholars have traditionally chosen not to examine closely. Tonight, you will learn what those euphemisms meant. You will learn about the punishment system that the Ottoman Empire developed to control the most valuable and dangerous women in the Islamic world. You will learn about the sack drownings, the silent bowstrings, the living burials, the methods that were refined over 6 centuries of imperial rule. You will learn about the hierarchy of the harem, why some women were wives and others were concubines, what rights attached to each status, and how those rights affected the punishments available for their transgressions. You will learn why the Sultan's legal wives faced different deaths than his concubines, why some women were strangled while others were drowned, why some deaths were public warnings and others were silent disappearances. You will learn about the officials whose job it was to investigate, condemn, and execute the women of the imperial household, the Bostanchi, Bashi, with his mute executioners, the Kuzlar Asa, who served as prosecutor and judge, the Valide Sultan, whose authority over the harem made her the most powerful woman in the empire and the most dangerous enemy any concubine could have. You will learn why other women of the harem were forced to witness these punishments, what function that witnessing served, how terror was used as a tool of governance in a world where hundreds of women competed for the attention of a single man. You will learn about the children, the sons who were strangled to prevent succession disputes, the daughters who were married off to eliminate potential claims, the pregnancies that were terminated because they came at inconvenient moments. The entire system of reproductive control that made the harem not merely a household, but a machine for producing legitimate heirs, while destroying any possibility of illegitimate ones. Subscribe if you want to understand what the Ottoman Empire actually was, beneath the architectural beauty and the military conquests and the flowering of Islamic art and literature. Comment below, telling me where you are watching from, because Mahidevran is about to be sewn into that sack, and I am going to tell you exactly what happens inside it. But before I describe what she experienced in the black water of the Bosphorus, I need to take you back. I need to show you how the Ottoman harem functioned, why it was designed the way it was, and why the punishments for women who violated its rules were so extraordinarily brutal. Because you cannot understand what happened to Mahidevran without understanding the system that killed her and the logic that made her death seem necessary to those who ordered it. The Ottoman harem was not what Western imagination has typically portrayed. It was not primarily a collection of sexual playthings maintained for imperial pleasure, though that element certainly existed. It was, fundamentally, a political institution designed to solve a problem that had plagued every dynasty in human history: how to ensure legitimate succession while preventing the conflicts that competing heirs inevitably created. The problem was acute for the Ottomans because of their particular combination of circumstances. They were an absolute monarchy, with all power concentrated in the person of the Sultan. They practiced a form of succession that did not automatically favor the eldest son, meaning that any son might potentially inherit the throne. And they ruled an empire so vast and wealthy that the stakes of succession were almost unimaginably high. These conditions created a recipe for civil war. If multiple princes survived to adulthood, they would inevitably compete for the throne. That competition would divide the empire, weaken its military capacity, invite intervention by foreign powers, potentially destroy everything the dynasty had built. The Ottomans developed two complementary solutions to this problem. The first solution was fratricide. When a new sultan ascended the throne, he was expected, and eventually required by law, to execute all his